man has always wondered how he came into existence and who created him. According to an ancient Greek idea, life was transferred from Cosmozoa to different planets in small units called spores. These spores had a thick, impenetrable covering which penetrated the loss of water and other necessary components. It was assumed that under favorable conditions of temperature and moisture, these spores gave birth to the initial living organisms on the as yet uninhabited planets. One belief common among all people of all cultures is that all the different forms of life, including human beings, suddenly were created by a divine order about 10,000 years ago. These innumerable forms of life have always been the same and will last without change from generation to generation until the end of the world. The theory of spontaneous creation. If you look around at our everyday environment, we observe that oil, mud, dirt, indeed any sort of refuse or rotting matter is infested with a wriggling, moving multitude of living organisms. Aristotle, known as the father of biology, maintained that not only worms and insects, but also fish, frogs and mice could spring from suitable breeding materials like filth and moist soil. He even held that man must have had similar origin. But this theory of spontaneous generation was disproved by the experiments of the French microbiologist Louis Pasteur in 1862. The theory of chemical evolution. The question of how life came into being in the first place still remained unanswered. Soviet biochemist Oparin and the British biologist Haldane tried to do just that. They proposed that life could have arisen from the non-living organic molecules. This was called the theory of chemical evolution. Biological evolution. We can presume that biological evolution began with the formation of the first true cells. These must have been forms that did not require free oxygen and lived at the expense of organic molecules available in the waters that surrounded them. Eventually, as nutrients were depleted, the first cells capable of using carbon dioxide and energy from light to make their own food through photosynthesis must have arisen. Today, the diversity of plant and animal forms we have ranges from simple single-celled organisms to many kinds of plants on one side and animals including man on the other. Toward the beginning of the 19th century, scientists had already started doubting the theory of special creation, and various attempts were made to explain the different forms of life could have evolved. Lamarck, a French naturalist, for instance, believed that all living things adapted to their environment by using and developing their organs and characteristics that suit their environment best. If environment changed, their organs too changed accordingly to suit the needs of the times, and these changes were passed from one generation to another. Accordingly, as giraffe lived in an environment of high trees, and had to stretch its neck to eat the leaves. Its neck became long, and this trait was inherited by its descendants. This theory had won little support with the scientists. The English naturalist Charles Darwin explained how biological evolution took place in his remarkable The Origin of Species in 1859. Darwin's great innovative step was to introduce the theory of natural selection as the mechanism for evolution. The theory began with two observations. First, more organisms are born than can survive to reproduce themselves because the environment has limited means of subsistence. This overproduction results in a struggle for existence and ultimate survival of the fittest. The second observation is that everything that enables organisms to produce and that children differ slightly from their parents and from each other in characteristics which they inherit. Charles Darwin, in his Origin of Species, gave a mechanism for the evolution of plants and animals in general. He published a book, Descent of Man, in which he speculated that like other animals, man too had evolved from pre-existing living forms. Darwin was greatly impressed by the similarities in the bodily structure of man and the great African apes, the chimpanzees and the gorilla. From this, he speculated on the location of man's origins. He had noted that embryos, that is, early unborn young ones of different organisms, pass through very similar stages. However, small alterations in the timings of events in early development might produce a substantial change in the mature organism. The evidences of human evolution. The paleontological evidence. Paleontology is a branch of earth sciences which essentially a study of plant and animal life in the past of geological periods millions of years ago. The first hominids. The earliest human-like or hominid remains come from two separate East African sites. Ethiopia has yielded several hundred fossil fragments of individuals that lived and died between 3 and 3.6 million years ago. The second site is in Tanzania, where three hominids left a 20-meter trail of footprints some 3.75 million years ago. The Australopithecus. By about 2 million years ago, there were several well-established hominid ancestors in Africa. One of the earliest of these is Australopithecus. Fossils of Australopithecus, which have been recovered from South and East Africa, show that their brains were relatively small. Their bones enclosing the brain, therefore, were rather ape-like, but the face was shorter than in apes. Homo habilis. One of the most important developments in human evolution was the fossil data found about Homo habilis, which showed that they apparently had brain capacities just like us. The species name Homo habilis means handy man. Homo habilis walked upright, the bones of hand while displaying many characteristics of modern human were curved in places like the modern Homo sapiens. Homo erectus. Homo erectus, or the erect man, first arose at least 1.6 million years ago and continued to live for more than a million years before the transition to Homo sapiens occurred. The Neanderthals. They existed throughout Western Europe and across into the Near East and Central Asia from about 1 lakh years ago to 40,000 or 35,000 years ago, depending on the precise locality. Neanderthals were proficient hunters, skilled tool makers, and they used hides for protecting their bodies. Homo sapiens, modern human beings. Discoveries of number of fossils of Homo sapiens suggest that modern humans arose in Africa and migrated to the rest of the world via the Middle East. Apart from paleontological evidence, there are also anthropological, biochemical, and chemical evidences which suggests that the evolution of life and man has been a gradual process. This is a story of how the evolution of life and man has taken place.